Hi, Stuart here. In the first of what will be a series of cloud pattern presentations. And today we're going to talk about example one, a typical N-tier cloud. I want to point out that unlike my other videos, this one is going to be a bit more prescriptive. It's based on essentially the last 10 years or so of my delivering real projects that went into production for real customers. I think that gives me the authority to speak to this topic on the grounds that things that go into production and get used are, by their very nature, successful. And so, as I do these, I want to just tell you stories about what worked for me and my team. And I also want to say that none of them are taken 100% from any one project. They're amalgams. I'm going to call out very specific products and open source things in this presentation. And I'm doing it because they worked for me, right? But I have been told I need to have a disclaimer that says if they don't work for you, I can't take responsibility for that. Your mileage is going to vary. And like most things, details count. So subtle differences between use cases and implementations make a huge difference. I also want to be very clear about what my biases are, right? Because I think if you're going to talk about prescriptive architectures, particularly for the cloud, you need to come clean about what your biases are so that people can factor that into the story you're trying to tell. Number one is I tend to focus on Microsoft plus third-party things because they work. I deliver solutions working with my teams, and they work and they go to production and they serve a valuable business purpose and they're cost effective and they meet the functional and non-functional requirements, and that makes me happy. And so, this presentation is based on Azure, but a lot of the things I'm going to talk about probably would work on a bunch of different clouds. But I'm going to come and speak specifically about this use case in this time using parts and pieces that went into actual production systems. I have a strong preference for PaaS and SaaS. And for the purposes of this discussion, we're not going to talk about containers, but that is coming in a future lecture because I really don't want to spend time as I have a budget of hours, dollars, and people, and I need to be able to get the most out of that. And I find that the quickest way to get there is PaaS and SaaS or containers. And again, we're not going to talk about them this time, but that factors in. And so, not building virtual machines, not having to make all the plumbing to do repaving and do all the stuff that goes with it. Now, are there use cases where despite all my best efforts, I can't avoid a virtual machine? Absolutely. I would just prefer to not have to deal with them if I can. I believe good DevOps is table stakes for the cloud, right? If you can't repeatedly deploy your infrastructure to make new environments or tear down an entire environment, like tear down dev to zero and rebuild it, then you're missing out not only on agility, but you're missing out on the potential that a clean slate brings you. I like Azure DevOps. I like GitHub. I've done projects using both. I love them both. They work great. They have the feature they need. And needless to say, Git is my source control of choice. I tend to focus on things that have wide use and adoption. I have an allergy personally to the bleeding edge or even the leading edge. I like things that I know are proven to work and are broadly adopted, particularly for open source things. And you'll see this when we start talking about the drawing. And then, cost effectiveness and aiming at one throat to choke. For our first scenario, which is a real life scaling web over services and data implementation. Couldn't be more bread and butter if you try. So this diagram has a lot of moving parts, but it's in my preferred diagramming style. You'll see this in a lot of my presentations. And essentially, I'm showing organizational tiers as boxes. I'm showing tiers in the application as dashed lines. And then, things are connected to other things via different color arrows, and we'll get into that in a minute. The the outside of the box for our example is we have Azure and Azure DevOps. And within that, we create an account using Azure Active Directory. And an account is a collection of subscriptions, and an account represents who's paying. And so typically we park the Azure Active Directory there. And if you have Office 365 too, then it's all much of a muchness. And our roles and our identities in Azure DevOps can be based off that Active Directory. And we have basically one place to do identity and authentication magic. So I like that. And things that run in Azure are Active Directory friendly. So I don't have to write a bunch of shims or intermediate services or whatever. It just, the identity, the authentication parts just work. Now, authorization is going to oftentimes be very, very complicated. So I always tell people, don't write your own identity management. Don't write your own authentication. But, you can build on that to customize your authorization if that's what you need to do. Or if there's something easy to use and out of the box, like an Azure Active Directory group, and that's granular enough for you and easy enough for you to manage, then that's probably okay. Same advice for writing cryptography. Please don't use somebody's well-known crypto. So my team tends to be TypeScript and .NET developers, typically doing something like Angular and TypeScript on the front end. And that's the assumption I'm making in this diagram. So in this diagram, we're serving up our front end that is compiled and assembled by a pipeline that's in Azure DevOps and written to a blob store. And then we associate that blob store using a little network loop magic. So I can always fall back to the previous version, right? So I'll use different directory hierarchies in my blob store, one for the current version, one for the last version, one for the version before that. And I'll keep so many around. And then I want to front that with a CDN so that if I have a site that's got lots of assets, whether it's images or customized chunks of text, localization, whatever, as people browse to my URL and are redirected to my CDN, we're going to offload a lot of the stuff even off the blob storage. And because it's TypeScript and Angular, it's a single page application style. And so I don't actually need a web server to host that anymore. It used to be you needed IIS or Apache or Nginx or something. And with the latest technology changes that Microsoft has made, I can put my static content site that I've generated through my pipeline into a blob store, front it with a CDN if I want. If you don't have that many users or that many assets, you could probably skip the CDN thing. And then when people go to my web application firewall and get redirected to that, then that offloads an awful lot of consumption from my infrastructure that I have to pay for to your browser. But it also is a better user experience. So there's a lot of advantages to that. And it also means that for purely content changes, the folks that run the content for one or more application sites that I'm hosting, they can have their own cadence of releases separate from the web services tier, which we're going to talk about next. So we're going to have our website loaded into your browser. Your browser is going to be hitting our Web API tier, and it's going to pass through some gatekeepers. There are lots of different kinds of WAFs in the universe, but the one I've come to love is Imperva Encapsula. Firstly, and I think I've mentioned this before, because it sits astride a fair fraction of the internet, and so can really figure out if a particular packet or stream of traffic is coming from where legitimately it says it's coming from. So I can do geofencing, but I can also do least cost routing. So if my subscription replicates this infrastructure across a bunch of Azure data centers and Imperva Encapsula sort of straddles the world, so to speak, I can do global traffic management. So I can send you to the country or jurisdiction appropriate site. And hopefully that's also the site that has the least latency for you as an end user. Again, not only am I gaining a security thing, but I'm gaining the ability to do a little global traffic management. The other thing is that I can make sure that the very clever people who write web application firewalls, they're going to be looking at all the incoming traffic and they're going to be going, ooh, that looks evil. I will not let that through. Or that's coming from evil regime number 7. And I have a rule that says I don't allow traffic from evil regime number 7. And I've tried a bunch of different WAFs and they kind of fall into 3 piles. Things that are imperva encapsula, stuff that's good enough, but not great. And then stuff that frankly adds little or no value other than traffic inspection, right? Looking at the actual packets that show up. As we pass into our account space, so to speak, we want to have these little shieldy things. This is a network security group, but basically that is Microsoft speak for some network security rules, right? A group is a set of rules and we can have lots of groups. And so all of our traffic that's coming forward or aft of our system is going to be ruled by these security groups, and they're going to say, yea, verily, this packet may pass, or no, thou shalt not pass. Then I'm going to have a load balancer in front of that. And modern load balancers are capable of doing many clever networky things. And then here's another case where I really feel strongly about a API management product. In this case, Apogee. I really like it. It runs circles around the native Azure one, which I've taken an intense dislike to. And it works across all the clouds that I typically work on. And it's mature and it's full of nice features and they kind of have reasonable variable pricing. And it is in all respects excellent. So I can have an Azure DevOps deployment pipeline that deploys my web services and other ephemera off to my app service tier. And in the process, I can register that new or updated endpoint with Apogee, and I can apply policy rules to it, and I can have rules that help me shape traffic and so on. And then we have Azure App Services, the PaaS hosts for the actual code me and my developers are writing. We typically write things for this tier in .NET, specifically ASP.NET Core 3.1, LTS, long-term support. But I've written stuff in Node.js, long-term support. My other teams have written stuff in Java, and other teams have written stuff in Python Flask, and it just runs great. And it's got lots of sophisticated features. For one thing, it does a nice job of instrumenting to App Insights, which is kind of off map right now, so that I can get monitoring, logging, and awareness. And it allows me to have deployment slots, so I can do blue-green deployments. And I want my web services in some cases to have an idea of shared state. I want it to be much higher performing than traditional storage or database or NoSQL backends. And so I love Redis, in part because my teams and I have gotten really good at leveraging Redis, in part because Azure offers Redis as a platform as a service component. And I love that because they offer lots of different sizes and scales and all that stuff. And you just go in, and if you make a bad choice, hey, you run a script and you change the SKU you're using, and presto changeo, happiness ensues. Likewise, I often want to queue up work to be done asynchronously by a backend somewhere. And we love Azure Service Bus. We love queues. We love topic queues. We love PubSub. We just love Service Bus because, among other things, it can take millions of messages an hour, and it has retention times for messages up to 2 weeks. The topic message queuing mechanism is simple and elegant. It supports leasing. You can go see my video on Azure Service Bus for more. And it just is in every way manageable, monitorable, and delightful. And of course, it plays nice with all the other pieces and parts. So my next tier in is my storage and backend tier. And so I've got storage and SQL and other stuff. And it's talking to, all the things are connecting to a network segment with lots of network security rules on them. And I'm only letting certain traffic pass from certain places to certain other places. And I can guarantee that's true and audit that that's true because Azure has all those tools. It's also the place where I typically park the functions that are doing back-end work. And Azure has two kinds, regular and durable, and they have different use cases, and I'll probably do a video on that. But typically, if I'm servicing a queue to do some sort of business function, I will do so off the Azure Service Bus. Functions can also be freestanding and be initiated by, for example, a cron-like project, and that's nice. And of course, my functions can interact with the other things in the storage tier, like my databases, my storage, and other things. And of course, they can interact if they need to make service calls or whatever that are in my front end. And then ultimately, there is my back office in which I have my administrative things. I'm doing analytics as represented by the Power BI block here, but there could be other analytic things in that tier. And anything else that's sort of back office-y. So there's a really high level common set of solutions. This is my 80% starting place when I get a new project, right? I go, does this thing need to talk to the outside? If so, then I do the first block of stuff. And then am I going to have web services? If so, I do the second block of stuff. Do I have deferred processing? Then I'm going to do the service bus and function stuff. Do I have a need to have shared state with high performance between my web services or within a cluster of N web services? Then I'm going to throw Redis in there. Do I need storage? If so, what kind? Azure offers lots of different storage. Do I need databases? If so, what kind? Azure offers lots of different kinds of databases, SQL and NoSQL. My 80% place is Microsoft Azure SQL Server. Sometimes I'm a Mongo guy, and sometimes I am doing something else. Sometimes I'm using Cosmos DB. It just depends on my use case, but this is the tier I put those things in. I always want to provide an administrative interface. Sometimes that's well subsumed by the Azure control panel, and or pipelines in Azure DevOps. But sometimes, we want some sort of back office or administrative control over this system that we're delivering. All in all, this is kind of what my 80% starting place looks like.